So I'm super excited. My colleague, Dr. Dara Friedman-Wheeler, and I are going to be presenting today on being the change, tips and tools for promoting social change. And this is based on a book that we have coming out in January. So some of this you could also read about if you're so inclined in January when it comes out. So my introduction, I am Dr. Jamie Bodenlos. I am a professor of psychological science at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, which is a small liberal arts college in upstate New York in Geneva. I've been there for almost 14 years, and I teach all the courses in clinical psychology. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist, so I do see clients in private practice as well. Um, and yeah, I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself and then talk a little bit about how we got together in this work.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I'm Dr. Dara Friedman-Wheeler. I am also a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm currently working as a research psychologist at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland, and I also have a very small private practice. So Jamie and I got connected to this work, and well, to each other actually, originally via Facebook when we were both teaching at small liberal arts schools, and we originally co-authored a piece on mentoring undergraduates in the research process. And then several years ago, we both were becoming more socially engaged and more active, and realized that there were some struggles that came along with that, with trying to create social change while also parenting and working. And we also realized that some of the strategies we're very familiar with through cognitive behavior therapy could be useful in this work. So we were sort of using them to support each other, and we thought, hey, maybe this will be helpful to other people too. And first we wrote a newsletter column about it, and then, as Jamie said, a book on the topic. And now we're here to share some of those tips with you all as well.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
I will pass it back to Jamie.
All right. So, so it's interesting because when we started this work, we kind of had our own sort of issues and things that we were working towards. But when we think about this idea of change work, it's way broader than any of us really think. We may have our own issues that we want to change. And like we talked about in the description of this webinar, that may evolve over time, which we'll get to a little bit later. But when we think about change work, I mean, maybe when we think about it, initially you think about activism or policy changes, but this work is being done probably by everybody in this audience that's here today in some way or another, right? So you can think about it as school teachers who are in the classroom that are probably coming up against different barriers and things that with the kids that they're teaching or the policies that they have to adhere to, or to the individuals in the audience who are thinking about climate change and the earth and things like that. So this work can come in many sorts of, I guess it can be sort of encompassed in many different ways. And you can see in the picture a little bit of different ways that we've thought about that work. And on the next slide, I want to ask you all kind of what that change work looks for you, and what ways are you either working to change the world, or are you having thoughts about wanting to change the world? What are the issues that you're working towards? So maybe if you want to put in the chat, some of the things that you're working towards changing, maybe what are the top issues for you? And I'll just give you guys a few minutes to think about it and drop some stuff in the chat. So I think that these are some great issues and really important ones as well. And I guess my follow-up question to this is, what are you doing now? I mean, if you're doing anything, what are you doing now related to these issues? And it's okay if you're not, but if you are, just list what you're doing, or maybe some of you are struggling to get started.
And maybe if folks are still getting started in this work, they could write that in the chat as well, so we know sort of where you are as we proceed today. Great, thank you.
That's great, Emma. I feel like, educating yourself is definitely a good first step too.
And kind of an ongoing one.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. So many great things listed here. And I mean, I guess if you were to sort of rate your involvement in this work now, where would you put yourself? I'm really big as a clinical psychologist at quantifying and as a researcher. So, if in terms of your involvement in this work, would you say that it's 0, not at all right now, you're just getting started, or 10 is it's your job? Like this is all you do. 100% of your time is spent doing this. So just throw a number out there, and it's okay. Just be honest. We're actually using this as a way to understand, everyone who's here today to sort of better um, kind of tailor and gear our presentation today. So. Lots of sixes. That's great. I don't know. I was thinking about what my number would be right now, and I probably, I mean, it's not a six. I mean, I feel like doing what we're doing today is a part of the work. All right. So thank you, everyone. I think we're going to move forward. This is really helpful. Dara, do you have anything to add before we move forward to the next? Okay. So for today's webinar, we want to cover and talk a little bit about the role that values play in our social change work. It's really important to that and sort of like our work-life balance, whether that work be school or your employment, but we're going to talk a little bit about values and how to take action. So are you doing everything that you want to do right now in ways to sort of move forward from there? Probably one of the biggest things that we all encounter in this work are the barriers, right? Whether it's a time barrier, whether it's a motivation barrier, or whether it's just feeling demoralized along the way, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about barriers and overcoming them and maintaining our motivation over long term. And, given what you've all read in the chats, it's very likely that the issues that we're encountering vary by all of us and our interests in what we're doing now. So at the end, we're going to open things up for a discussion and answer any questions and kind of go from there. So I'm going to turn things over to Dara, who's going to talk a little bit about values.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. So we find that it's often good to start these conversations by inviting people to tune into their values or what are called in acceptance and commitment therapy valued directions. And I just threw up here some pictures of some different images that might bring to mind some of the things that make your life meaningful. And that's kind of what we mean by values. And we tend to, we refer to these things in ACT in particular as valued directions because they are just that. They are things that we're working towards. They're not things we're ever going to really accomplish or finish. Um, so yeah, Jamie, if you want to
Okay.
advance, sorry. Yeah, so the valued directions that we're talking about can help guide our change work and help guide us through all of the things we're going to talk about today. And one of the ways that I like to help people sort of tune into those or clarify those is to think about sort of who you want to be in different domains of your life. And different domains are going to be differently important to different people, and that's totally fine too. So what I'd like to do now is just ask you to look at these 4 questions on the screen and maybe think about what your answer would be to 2 or 3 of them. And you can either write it in your notebook or write it in the chat if you feel like it, or if you want to just hold it private, that's fine too. But so things like, what kind of a family member do you want to be? What kind of a family member do you want to be maybe in your marriage or partnership with your siblings? What kind of parent do you want to be? What kind of child do you want to be? Um, what kind of employee or worker or boss do you want to be? What kind of friend do you want to be? And what kind of citizen do you want to be? So maybe again, pick a couple of those, think about what's most important to you, um, and then um, and then come up with sort of what your answer might be there. Compassion, that's a big one of mine too. Compassion and kindness kind of in all domains. Yeah, some of these things do span domains. Absolutely. Any other thoughts that people want to share? Okay, so maybe we'll move on ahead here. Yeah, informed and open-minded. Great. So one of the next questions that we like to ask as we're thinking about how do these values sort of guide us in our day-to-day work is how do these line up with how we're spending our time? So if you were to monitor your time, say you could make a schedule, looks like a calendar, and write down what you're doing every day. Are you in fact spending most of your time working towards these values? Compassion, kindness, patience, being informed, open-minded? Is it something that often gets short shrift because you're just too busy? That's kind of what we want to look at here. And I think Jamie will talk a little more about how to get us from our values to what we call committed action, where we're really moving forward towards these valued directions.
So I think one of the steps that that Dara just mentioned is the first of the monitoring of your time. So how are you spending your time? And I'm going to kind of jump back and forth between the work that I do with clients or other people that I'm kind of talking with, but you can look at the amount of time that you're spending and the activities that you're spending it on and sort of see, a visual as to whether you're actually doing work in line with your values. And when I say spending your time, I ask you all to reflect on sort of like the amount of time that you spend on your phone or scrolling social media, which I feel like we're all guilty of doing. But how much time is that eating up of your day? How many activities are you doing a day, or time spent in those activities that are not doing things that are in line with your value? Whether that's going back um, to the previous slide where you're thinking about, what kind of citizen do you want to be? What kind of family member do you want to be? So looking at that time and thinking, what can give? What out of my time am I doing that that doesn't have to be? And I feel like, there's a lot of parallels in this as we think about, or as I think about work-life balance, right? Especially being in academia, there's a lot of things that, a lot of service that you get asked to do, and a lot of things that, are either high value activities that sort of help, or low value activities that maybe will take a lot of your time without much getting back, right? And while service activity is great, it's, is that really in line with the things that are important? Is it taking time away from, say, being with my children, or spending time with my family, or really showing up and being present? So when we talk about committed action, we want to, after figuring out how we're spending our time and what can give, think about goals to set, right? So if you look at your time and you see that you're scrolling a lot on your phone, what time of day is that happening? Is that eating up sort of precious moments of our time where we're more alert, where we can get more things done? Is it taking time away from health activities, right? Like being physically active, which can help us reduce stress so that we can show up more fully in our activities. So committed action is about sort of setting goals, and then kind of following through with them. And there are a lot of ways a lot of strategies we can use to help people follow through with them, right? So one of them is making sure that your goal is realistic. So for example, I recently met with a client who set a goal of meditating, going from 0 meditations a week to 5 meditations a week. And when we talked about it, and, I sort of let this client move forward with it. And we soon realized that didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. And how do you think that client felt when, the goal was to do 5 activities and they did none? What are some thoughts or feelings you think that individual had? And, I'm a teacher, so my instinct is to ask the classroom, but yeah, so discouraged, probably, maybe even feeling like a failure, maybe feeling like, there's no way that they can do this in the future. So the strategy is to sort of problem solve. So what are some ways that that individual could move forward from that? So we looked at some of the barriers that came up. Not having realistic expectations was the number one barrier. Not having a good time to do it. The time that person had set out to do the activity also interfered with other things that were high value. So, thinking about what time of day you're doing that and making sure it doesn't interfere with another activity. Setting up cues in the environment was something else. So, also social accountability is another really big one, right? So a lot of times, if you're thinking about making some sort of change in your life, you want to be thinking about telling other people so that you can be held socially accountable. So that's another sort of big thing. Dara, am I missing any sort of important thing in terms of moving forward with behavior change and committed action?
I don't think so. I think I would just maybe point out that these goals or the committed action are much more concrete and, in fact, we like to say concrete and measurable than the values, right? So these are things we can do along the way that are in the direction of our values, but they're very specific. So meditating 5 times a week, whether or not you've done that, right? That's what
Right.
we mean by concrete and measurable.
Right. So if one of your values, like going back to the other slide too, is, thinking about relationships with your family members, what does that look like, right? Like I want to, be more compassionate, because that came up a lot, towards a family member. So what would that look like? How would you measure compassion towards a family member? Is that showing up and truly listening? Is that action that you take? Is that being physically present, or does that mean when you're talking to that family member that you are, making eye contact, not scrolling on your phone at the same time that you're there with them? Is that taking a walk with them? What does that look like? What that looks like to me is going to look different for you. Does that all make sense to everyone? And we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end too. So that all sounds fine and good. And as I just mentioned with my client, there are definitely barriers that come up in this work. And they're common barriers, I feel like, that come up in this work. And then there's individual, more specific barriers. So we're going to go ahead and talk about what some of those barriers are to either getting started or keeping that work going, right? Because those are two different things. So I think we'll probably jump back and forth with these. But obviously, a lot of the issues that you all brought up and the issues that we're all kind of working towards are associated with anxiety and stress. I think one that one of our members brought up, Hudson, was sort of like climate change. Open up your, news app, or, look at the news, and it can be anxiety provoking to see, some of the news about climate change and what's happening. So that definitely can be a barrier, right? We know that anxiety often leads to avoidance. So that could then in turn affect the change work. Anger or frustration. Lots of ways that could come up, right? Being angry at the direction of, your country, or the way that things are going with injustices, whether that's at a smaller level, maybe on your college campus or in your community, or more on a sort of national level when you look at, the United States, or kind of across, our country. Lack of motivation. We know that our motivation kind of waxes and wanes for doing this work, right? I hate to bring up the gloomy snow that we have here in upstate New York, but I know that my own motivation sort of declines, dependent on other things, right? External factors, sorts of change in seasons can be a factor. But also motivation can change dependent on, what's going on around you. Maybe you have interpersonal issues that have come up that have decreased your motivation, or maybe, like kind of feeling demoralized or discouraged could affect motivation. Being demoralized is, obviously a big one, especially when you're dealing with these sort of really big issues, whether it's racial injustice or climate change, or, like voter turnout, a lot of these things that you guys brought up.
Yeah, and I wanted to note too that something kind of maybe they might not anticipate, but that affects motivation. Actually, when things seem to be going well, I think sometimes we lose motivation. Like,
I
oh,
was
maybe
thinking
this
that as
problem
well.
doesn't
Yeah.
need so much of my attention right now anyway. But yeah, sometimes when we pick a new issue or we find something that we're really concerned about, it's hard to know where to get started. So perhaps it is social justice work that calls to you the most. How can I reduce injustices that folks in all kinds of circumstances experience? That's a huge problem, right? And it's very entrenched. It's been around for a long time. It's not going to go away overnight. So how do I get started? Finding the time to do it, as we were talking about, and this is one of the things that Jamie and I really struggled with, and still do, I guess, is where does this fit in? I have so many other responsibilities. Just, keeping my family fed and alive and getting myself to work every day, right? That takes up most of our time for some of us. So where am I going to find the time to fit this in? As Jamie said, interpersonal struggles can affect us, whether they're relationship issues we're having outside of our work that really take a toll and drain us emotionally, or interpersonal issues within the work. One of you talked about having tough conversations. That is so important right now and also can take a lot out of you. And so we need to be aware of that and try to figure out how to address that as well. And similarly, issues within a group. So sometimes you are a member of a group, you're working towards a goal, but people do not agree about how to get to that goal. And that can be tricky as well. So I guess sort of the premise here, as I said, one of the things Jamie and I noticed was like, hey, we can call on some of our CBT strategies here to help us navigate some of these challenges. And we'll certainly talk about other strategies as well in a moment. But one of the things that we identified as potentially helpful for ourselves and for each other was thinking about our busyness and feelings of overwhelm with respect to our weekly schedule. And remember, we had said that this can be really helpful in terms of figuring out how much your values and your daily actions align. So this, it's tiny on your screen, but it's a weekly schedule, just the days of the week and the hours of the day down the left. Just tracking your time for a week can be super helpful to see, where is my time going? And am I spending an hour every day doom scrolling without even realizing it, which so many of us are. Um, Thank you, Hudson, for your chat. So even just tracking it, monitoring can be a really helpful intervention. And then maybe we can see like, okay, maybe instead of spending that hour every night on my phone, I could write a few postcards before I go upstairs and go to bed, or whatever it is that I want to try to do. So this monitoring and planning specific behaviors can be helpful. It's also helpful to look at our thoughts or our cognitions. And one of the ways to do that, and there are many ways to do it, but there are cognitive restructuring worksheets, what we call thought records. There are also some apps out there. There are a lot of apps out there. One that I kind of like is called Mood Kit, and I think we have its logo in the slide, Jamie, if you don't mind.
Is it? I have to go.
Get that to
Oh
show
yeah.
up. There it is. I guess they don't all show up at once. I sort of forgot. But look at the kinds of thoughts you're having about this work that might be getting in the way. So things like, I have to fix this, right? I mean, that's great if we feel driven to make things better, but if it feels like an insurmountable task, it might feel overwhelming and not so helpful. So we might want to revise that thought a little bit to be something more like, I want to be a part of the solution, or this situation is hopeless. A thought like that is going to interfere with our motivation, right? And a lot of these things, as we said, are very entrenched and very difficult problems. But there's a difference between very entrenched and very difficult and hopeless, right? And when we tell ourselves things are hopeless, we may have, it may make things harder for us to move forward towards our valued directions. So check those thoughts. Are they realistic? Are they accurate? Are they helpful? Could it be more helpful to just focus in another direction? So instead of the things that seem hopeless, can I focus on places where it's easier to make a difference? And if you want to do this in a more formal way, as I said, there are thought records that you could download online to do as a worksheet, or you could download one of these apps like Mood Kit, which will help sort of walk you through those thoughts as well. In terms of anxiety, which was on the last slide as well, certainly the cognitive approaches can be really helpful there, but so can things like meditation, deep breathing, progressive deep muscle relaxation, yoga, right? Some of these things can help us manage some of the anxiety and stress that we might feel so that it becomes a little bit less of a barrier as well. And of course, there are apps for these things too, right? Some of you might use Headspace, some like Calm. Some of those apps that are out there can be helpful in terms of guiding us through those activities. And I think the last thing I just want to draw your attention to is sort of coming back to your values and goals. And Jamie, I think there's one more image that can show up on this slide
One
here.
more. Wow. Okay. Oh
And this
yeah.
This is a cartoon from the ACT world, from the acceptance and commitment therapy, that suggests that when we have these barriers, whether they're emotional, whether they're internal, external, that doesn't mean we have to stop moving in our valued direction. And so this little guy here is carrying a whole bunch of balloons. In the full image, I think you can see that the things on the balloons are some of these obstacles, like anxiety, or demoralization. We might think, oh, forget it, I might as well give up. The philosophy behind ACT suggests that we just accept that we're having those feelings and keep doing the work anyway, keep focused on our committed actions and keep focused on our valued directions. So we can carry those things with us. They might not feel as light as balloons, but we can carry those things with us as we proceed in our valued directions.
And I want to just add something onto what you just said, Dara, is that, if you think about anxiety or depression as sort of being on one end of the rope, right? If you think of tug of war, right? You're on one end and anxiety and depression are on the other. Many of us struggle with anxiety. It can often be debilitating, and many of us struggle with depression as well. And when we are depressed and anxious, it usually takes us out of our world and we just kind of be focused on that, right? So we are trying to get that to go away, right? We're trying to get the depression to go away. We're trying to get the anxiety to go away. So imagine if you're dealing with this, that you're on one side of a rope, anxiety and depression on another side of the rope. And I always have to do this, but like it's like this tug of war, right? You're like, no, stop. I want you to go away. I want you to go away. And you're pulling and it's pulling you back, right? It's taking you back. No, I'm going to take over your life. And this whole time, as you're struggling, what's happening? Your life's going by, things are happening in your life as you're in this struggle. And the idea is with ACT is to sort of drop that rope, to let go of the rope, to sit here with anxiety and depression and let it be. And a part, it's more complex than just saying, let it be. A part of this is the mindfulness, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. But the idea is to pivot and turn towards the things that are important to you in your life. That anxiety and depression, a lot of times, aren't necessarily going to go away. They could quiet down more, but they're going to be there. And if you make room for it, and there's a lot of really excellent videos out there that sort of illustrate this point through sort of like cartoons and metaphors and things like that. But the idea is that you just let it be with you, let it be present with you, and pivot to the things that are important to you and do those things while that's there.
Yeah, and that can be so powerful because a lot of us are sort of waiting to get our lives started until we get all of those things resolved. And we don't have to. We don't have to
Yeah,
wait to get them resolved, and we may never get them resolved. So,
it can be a very powerful sort of process too. Yeah.
agree. So I was just saying, Jamie, that I cut the mindfulness bullet point from the slide because I was going to talk about it on the last one, but let's reintroduce it. Jamie, maybe you can talk a little bit about how mindfulness can help us with some of those processes.
Yeah. So mindfulness is mainstream right now, right? And if you're checking out at a grocery store, you turn toward the magazine section, you see mindfulness everywhere. But it isn't really that new to psychology. It's new in the sense that it's a part of this sort of third wave of cognitive behavioral therapies that came about in the late 1970s, early 1980s. The first being like mindfulness-based stress reduction. And what mindfulness is all about is being present in the moment, honing your attention into the here and now. And mindfulness can kind of help us to sort of deal with that internal dialogue that's constantly flowing in our head. It doesn't mean that we're ignoring it or suppressing it, but when we're in tune with the moment, when we're in tune in the present moment, we can sort of more objectively see that sort of running narrative that goes. And in going back to ACT, how this is important to what we were just talking about is that a lot of times our thoughts are fused, with our reality. And it's a lot of times, if you really pay attention, it's our thoughts, that are causing us distress. It's this idea that, I'm having the thought that things are hopeless, that affect our behavior and our emotions, right? When it's just a thought. And what mindfulness and meditation does is help provide that sort of barrier between the thoughts in the here and now. And like, oh, quite interestingly, I just had this thought that things are hopeless. That's really interesting. But I'm going to go back to making the phone calls I have to make to get people to sign this climate change petition that I've put forth, right? Like, so it's interacting with the things that are happening around us in a different way that we usually do. But mindfulness is that tool. So to be mindful, there are different strategies to do that. It's meditation, it's yoga, it's taking mindful walks where we're not listening to anything, we're not on the phone with someone, where we're truly just present and observing the things around us. Mindfulness is about being in touch with our senses, whether it's visual. Our breathing is usually the first thing that we get oriented to through mindfulness activities. Sounds, smells, sensations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to share about another a specific kind of mindfulness meditation that's out there too, called compassion meditation, which some of you may also be aware of. And, if we're on this call because we're trying to make things better in the world, it could well be that we are already fairly compassionate people, and you may be thinking, why do I need compassion meditation? And I just want to note that compassion meditation is a very specific a way of thinking about compassion and care for other people that is actually nourishing. And so when we're finding maybe we're feeling burned out in the work we're trying to do, or we feel drained, compassion meditation can kind of help us to hold our empathy and our concern and our desire to help, and also feel um, a little bit more steady or grounded in that work and feel a little bit more energized towards doing it. So, something I definitely recommend if folks are interested. And of course, self compassion as well. So, when Jamie was talking about her client who didn't reach their goal of 5 meditations a day, we have to be kind to ourselves, right? We don't tend to make positive changes because we're harsh with ourselves or because we punish ourselves or we feel shame, right? Shame does not help people grow. Um, Kindness and understanding and taking care of ourselves helps us to keep moving in those valued directions. And Jamie, I don't know if you wanted to talk about social support.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, depending on kind of where you are in your life, you may have more people around you versus other times where maybe you feel more isolated. But social support can be really helpful in terms of coping with stress and anxiety. And social support isn't just about having lots of interactions with people. It's a lot about emotional support, having people who truly listen to you, spending time with people who lift you up. And I feel like one thing like developmentally that happens too as we get older, we start figuring out the people that are providing us with social support and maybe the relationships that are a little bit more draining that really aren't providing us with much. And as we age, we get better at sort of like filtering out those sorts of more draining relationships and sort of building up those ones that kind of build us up too with it. So social support is turning to other people, when we are having struggles, is being able to share and be listened to, be validated, be heard. So yeah, that's kind of what we mean by social support there. And I'll just dive into sort of like the problem solving also, which is that some of the issues that we have, the barriers that we have, can be helped a lot by social support and compassion. But some are tangible problems, like when we think about the slide earlier, when individuals may have issues with working with a group, right? That maybe that we're not aligned with the same sort of goals as them, or there's certain strong personalities in the group, or the logistics of the way the meetings are run aren't working. These are things that can be solved by simple problem solving, right? Defining what is the problem that's happening here, what is this barrier that's happening, and what are some possible solutions to that. There's a whole therapy called problem solving therapy, and one of the strategies is to define what's the problem, generate a bunch of solutions, and then try out the one that seems most doable, and see if that changes. So sometimes it really comes down to solving a problem. the next coping strategy we have listed is physical activity and healthy eating. Why is this here when we're talking about social change? Because, the healthier we are physically, mentally, the better off we're going to be in doing this change work. So physical activity, I don't know how many of the people here, engage in regular physical activity. For me, physical activity means it helps reduce my anxiety and stress. It gives me time to think and decompress, and it helps me come back at an issue with a new mindset. Healthy eating goes hand in hand with the physical activity. So, it's really important when we're making health choices, to be thinking about fruits and vegetables and not drinking too much alcohol and not sugary food. And again, this helps us be our best self so that we can come at this work, with enough sleep's not on there, but that's also super important, well rested, well taken care of. If we're nourishing our body, we're nourishing our soul, we can come back to this work ready to go, fully energized. And a lot of times when we're at that point where we're worn out from the social change work, and you need a break because we will, that's also important too. Sometimes you just need to take a break, and that's okay from this work. Recharging your battery could just mean going back to sort of healthy activities, and taking care of yourself, just going back to the sort of basics. Um, and then the last bullet, yeah, Dara, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think, one of the reasons that I think it's important to mention the physical activity and healthy eating is that when the issue that we're working towards feels very pressing or urgent, or, it's the day before the election or something, we tend to let those things go. And we think, well, it'd be almost maybe selfish of me to spend that hour on the treadmill when I could be registering more voters, right?
Yeah.
But as Jamie's saying, you let those things go, you won't have enough steam to keep doing this work for the long haul. And that goes also with the slowing down and taking it one step at a time. So a lot of these things are urgent. A lot of, climate change is an urgent problem. I always say we're already like 400 plus years behind in terms of racial justice, right? So of course that feels like I got to fix this tomorrow. But we know, as psychologists, we know that is not how things happen, right? And so we do need to sort of approach it in terms of realistic goals and sort of bite-sized pieces, even when these things feel so urgent. So I think that sort of leads to our question, just if anybody had any other coping strategies or things that they do that helps them to kind of keep going in this work that they wanted to add in the chat to share with others. Things that we haven't talked about yet, but that are important for you in maintaining your work. And maybe as people are thinking about those and adding them to the chat, Jamie, maybe we can move on because I know we do want to make sure we have time for questions as well.
Yeah, so I mean, really, the last kind of major point to talk about, and this does kind of relate to the last bullet on the slide, is, that sometimes this work, like Dara's mentioning, is urgent, and we feel like we need to do something now, and that is true. Yeah, there are times where it does feel that way, and action does need to be taken. You will find though that over your lifespan, if you're on this webinar right now, you're probably somebody that this isn't going to be, this is going to be a lifelong sort of value, like behaviors that you're going to engage in. This isn't just right now. And there's a lot of emotions and things that change with this work, as well as what the work is that you're doing, right? You may have an issue that you're working on now, but you may find that as your life changes, that those sorts of issues change for you. And the only, I've had many issues that I've worked on, and I do think it's really helpful not to try to work on every issue at once, right? Like sometimes we really need to hone in, our issues that we're working on so that we can put our full selves into one thing. The best example I have for this is, just the fact that while my issues have changed over time, my focus and time has shrunk. So I don't have that much time to focus. And right now, like my major issue is, working in the schools and trying to get change to happen in the schools with things like unstructured play and things because of my life situation with having a 7-year-old daughter who's really struggling in school. You may find that as things change in your life that those issues may change, and it's really important to know that sometimes you may just not be able to do the work, whether it's because of external barriers like we mentioned before, things happening in your life, a family member gets sick, you get sick, maybe other things are happening, maybe work is taking over for a while. It's okay to take a step back, and that there are times that you may just have to pass the torch to somebody else. Maybe this comes in, if you're a teacher, you're teaching other people to do this work, or you're raising issues to other people. I don't know, Dara, if you want to add anything on to that.
Yeah, I think again, here's another place where remember that the feelings of guilt or shame that you might feel if you need to take a break from your change work are not gonna help, right? So, we want to notice them and acknowledge them, but also give ourselves permission to kind of be realistic about what we can and can't do at different times of life. Know that there are other people out there in the fight who are carrying this work forward for you, and that you will step back in when you can. The reason I say that about the guilt and the shame is that I think when if you come to associate shame for the things you haven't done with the work that you want to do, you'll be less likely to go back to it. You'll want to avoid it. It will become a negative thing. So kind of giving yourself permission to step out when you need to might make it easier for you to step back in when you can.
Great. Yeah, definitely. So, we're at the end, but we're truly not at the end, right? We first of all want to thank you for being here. We are just sharing our book, and a discount to purchase our book in the future, if you're inclined. I think right now where we are is we want to hear from you, and we want to talk to you about the issues that are, coming up with your work, so that we can help you, figure out the next step. So feel free to jot down any questions that you have in the chat, anything that's coming up more specifically for you. Um,
Yeah, I always find at the end of these workshops, it's a great opportunity for folks to sort of put their heads together and engage in problem solving. So if there are obstacles that you're encountering, or if you've been having trouble getting started, or if you're not sure which organizations to talk to or look at or whatever, please feel free to share some of those challenges in the chat right now. We'd be happy to hear other people's ideas of how to approach those, as well as sharing our own thoughts.
yeah. And I will also say too that we've all, anyone who's doing this work feels that guilt and shame from time to time. And just add on to what you were saying while we're waiting for some questions to come in, is just that, I stopped going during COVID to, a meeting that I was regularly going to. And my barrier was this thought that if I come back, if I attend a meeting, people are going to judge me for having not been there, that they'll be angry with me when I walk in, like, where have you been? You left us. Well, when I actually was honest about it and shared my thought with the leader of this group, she was just astounded. She's like, if you came through the door, we would be so happy to see you, right? It was like the opposite of what I thought. And, so that avoidance was so strong, it stopped me from going. But when I actually challenged that thought with, my own experiment to just be honest about my feeling, it was totally shut down and something different was happening. So any
I just want to,
questions?
oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I was just going to share also, since one of you mentioned having difficult conversations, I read a book recently that I thought was excellent on this topic, also written by two academic cognitive behavior therapists. So, of course, I thought it was great. But it's called It's Time to Talk and Listen. And I just put the link to that in the chat. And I think that that book is super helpful for folks who are wanting to engage in these difficult conversations. So I thought I'd recommend that as well. Any other questions, comments,
Yeah, thoughts.
concerns?
Yeah. Any issues that you're having or want to share anything? Thank you, Emma.
Mm,
Hmm.
Becoming more aware of the social issues. That's a great question.
Yes.
Anybody have any thoughts about that? How do you find out about things that are going on in your community that maybe you're not experiencing directly?
Yeah, Leslie, I think that is like a really good question because sometimes obviously news has its own spin on things. You may not be getting the full picture, and you may not be knowing what's going on specifically within those issues with the people that it's affecting, right?
Yeah. I think this is one area where talking and listening can really be helpful. And so, in addition to the news, certainly you may get some insights from social media, but of course, we all know there are downsides to those kinds of things as well, whether it's neighborhood specific or community specific or larger than that. But conversations, finding ways to engage in conversations with people, maybe people you don't see every day. Um, Maybe people you do see every day, but with whom you never have exchanged more than a hello, I think is one way that we can find out about these concerns. And I think really just being open and again listening. So when you're having those conversations, trying to understand and trying to hear what the person is going through. And then once you feel like you do have a grasp on it, maybe even asking, what can we do about this? How can I help? What would be helpful to you? I know that one of the things in my own neighborhood that's come up with respect to racial justice in particular is that my neighbors of color have a very different experience of my neighborhood and of the schools than I do. And as I learn more about that and I hear more about that, I want to get other people on board and I want to advocate and I want to find out from them what can I do to support you? What can I do to make this different? um, and and discussing, finding other like-minded folks and discussing and problem solving with them can be helpful as well. I don't know if others have thoughts along those lines.
And Leslie, I was just going to add too, I think, depending on where you are, right? Like, it could be that you go to like town board meetings, you go to the library, talk to people there. I'm thinking of just school board meetings, like just places where some things are coming up in like a discussion with community members. I don't know what that looks like in every community, but I do think that, there are groups and people in like Dara's mentioning, just talking to people that you don't often talk to. I think there was a book written a few years ago, and it was about, and maybe you remember this book, it's about talking to strangers. I'm a big talk to strangers person, and not in a sort of creepy way, but I do like to talk to people that I don't usually talk to. And a part of this is me approaching the world in sort of this open way. I open myself up to this, which is a curse and a blessing, because I do learn from people, what their struggles are and what's going on. And I'm not afraid to, even talk to people that maybe I on the outside look like maybe we don't share similar values. I think it's important to listen to other people and open up those conversations. Yeah. Oh, I see lots of good things coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Jamie and I were just talking about this yesterday, casually, in fact, that I've joined a group on Facebook called Buy Nothing, where people give stuff they don't need and ask for stuff they do need, and we exchange stuff. And I've met all kinds of new people through that group. So it can sometimes happen in sort of unexpected places too. Like here, I thought we were just, saving things from going to the dumpster prematurely, but in fact, we're also making personal connections that help us learn about other people's life experiences. So I think again, remaining open to it, you may find that kind of thing in a number of settings.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we're winding down on time here. Some people have already hopped off. We just really want to thank you for attending today and also for the work you're doing. Again, it's a reminder being in a group like this that we are not the only people working to make this world a better place, that we have each other as well. So thank you for all that you're doing.
Yes, thank you.